We're in the book of 2 Samuel chapter 3. 2 Samuel chapter 3. Been looking at the life of David, the life of Saul. Saul's life has come to an end. He was killed in battle. The nation's divided. Saul's dynasty, those that were in Saul's household, are trying to hold on to power. And then David now is beginning to strengthen in power. And so there's about to be a transition in the dynasty. The kingdom of Saul is about to be done away with. The kingdom of David is about to be established. And it's interesting because you look at these passages, and a lot of times just going, man, we're just looking at history. We're just looking at things that, have been documented, of events that had happened, thousands of years ago. What does that have to do with me? What does it have to do with us? Why do we even take the time to search out these things? And I would just simply put it to you this way, guys. There is typologies in the Bible. God is always trying to teach us lessons, and He teaches us lessons through the lives of others. And if you can learn a lesson from someone else's life, man, you saved yourself a heartache. Right? If you learn the lessons watching someone else fail, you go, man, I don't want to go down that road because I know what that produces. And I think that's really what Saul's life does for us. Remember Saul. Saul was a man who was called by God, anointed to be the king of Israel. He was given great privilege. He had great power. And Saul began very humbly serving the Lord. He began wanting to please the Lord, obedient. He went and took some steps of faith, and God honored those steps of faith. But it wasn't very long that Saul decided, you know what, I'm going to do things my way rather than God's way. And so God sends him on a mission to get rid of the Amalekites, because they had sinned against God and they had come against God's people. And so He said, I want you to destroy them. And rather than destroying them like God had instructed him, rather than killing all of the everyone alive and then all of the sheep and cattle, He said, just wipe it all out because it's all been defiled. Saul decides that I'm going to spare the king. I'm going to spare the animals, the lambs and the oxen, and it's going to be our reward for this battle that we're going into. And as he's coming back from that battle, Samuel, the prophet, meets him on the way, and he says, Saul, why won't you obey the Lord? And he says, I did obey the Lord. I went and, did what He told me to do. And he goes, you didn't obey the Lord. The Lord told you to wipe him out. What's the king doing here? What's all the sheep, doing here? Why do you have all the ox with you? He said, let me tell you, from now on, man, God is going to strip you from your kingdom. And this is the result of it. It was a downward spiral for Saul. It was that one event, but it just continued to accumulate. The longer Saul was in power, the more disobedient he became. Till God finally says, okay, enough is enough. And He takes Saul out by the Philistines. And actually the Amalekites, the one who ends up killing him in the end. Interesting. Just the very thing that you're trying to salvage is the very thing that comes back to destroy you. And all of this picture, we have, and I think, for all of us guys, now everyone's in a dilemma. Do we continue to follow Saul, or we now begin to follow David? God's man, God's choice, the man after God's heart. And so this is where we find ourselves in the passage. That Saul, his son's going to come into power, and now the nation's going to have to make a decision. Who am I going to put as my king? And I think really, for all of us, it's that same decision you and I have to make. Am I going to let the flesh or this world or the things that are in rebellion to God dictate, who I follow or who I serve? Or am I going to let the King, Jesus, rule over me? Is he going to be the one who I bow my knee to? Is he the one who I'm going to get instructions from? Is he the one who I'm going to follow? And every one of us have that battle. You know, there's a Saul in me, and there's this battle that happens inside of my heart constantly, where I got to decide daily, you know, am I going to do what God wants, or am I going to do what my own flesh wants? And it's a daily battle, and you got to, on a daily basis, come and say, Lord, I want your will. I want you to win this battle. I want you to rule over my life. And it's here. Watch what happens. Chapter 3, look at verse 1. Now, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. But David grew stronger and stronger. And the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker. What a picture. Saul's house, you know, and anytime your flesh is ruling you, your flesh isn't going to get stronger in the sense that it's going to become better. It's just going to take you down further. But if you're letting the Spirit guide you, if you're under God's authority, you become stronger and stronger in your spiritual life. And so we get just that overview. You know, Saul, his dynasty, his power, you know, his kingdom is diminishing. And then now David, it tells us, kingdom is strengthening. And then watch what happens in verse 2. Sons were born to David in Hebron. His firstborn was Ammon by Ahinoam the Jezreelitess. His second, Chileab, by Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. The third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmi, the king of Geshur. The fourth, Adonijah, the son of Haggith. And the fifth, Shephatiah, the son of Abital. The sixth, Ithram, by David's wife, Eglah. These were born to David in Hebron. Now, David ruled for 7 years in Hebron. He has 6 kids by 6 different women. And you're going, wait a second, I thought David was a spiritual guy. What's he doing with 6 women? I think the Spirit of God is revealing David's weakness. Revealing David's, you see, this is going to come back to bite him down the road. What we're getting is, David, you have a problem. And if you don't deal with this problem is going to have grave consequences upon your life later. And I think there's something, you know, for all of us to understand. We all have tendencies towards sin. We don't all have the same tendencies, but we all have tendencies towards sin, all of us. And if you're not aware of those weaknesses, you're not aware of those areas in your life that will take you out, will take you down. David is going to fall into sexual sin with Bathsheba. It was when he was the height of his power. He was now staying back from the battle, from the war, and he's sitting on his balcony, and he overlooks, and there's a beautiful woman down there bathing. And he decides, you know what, I want her. And he brings her in, and you know the story. We'll be getting to it in chapter 12. But what's incredible in that whole passage is that David should have been aware of his weakness. He's accumulating wives. You see, one of the things that the kings were warned about in the book of Deuteronomy, before kings were even in a thing, before Saul came into power, before David came into power, was they were not to accumulate horses, speaking of power, and they weren't to accumulate wives, speaking of their sexual desire. And what's incredible is David didn't heed. He followed what the other kings of the nations were doing, and so now he's accumulating wives for himself. And David's saying, "Oh, it's only 6." I mean, think about Solomon. He's got 1,000. Compared to other kings, that's no big deal. I only got 6 wives. I only got 6 kids right now. We're going to find out he has more down the road. But it's one of those areas that and one of the things I love about God's word and how God declares things is that he doesn't hide the sins of his servants. He doesn't paint David as something that he wasn't. He just tells us exactly where David's faults were and his areas of weakness were. And right here, I think we get a glimpse of that. Now, look at verse 6. We're getting into this power struggle. And now it was so, while there was war between the house of Saul and the house of David, that Abner was strengthening his hold on the house of Saul. Now, Abner was the commander in Saul's army. Saul died. Now his son has taken the throne. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Ai. Now the word Rizpah is hot coals. And I don't know if that meant she was like a hottie or something, but Rizpah, this gal, obviously got the attention of not only Abner or possibly Ishbosheth, who's his son, but somehow, they're both concerned about who's with her. Watch what happens. And Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Ai. To Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why have you gone into my father's concubine?" And Abner became very angry at the word of Ishbosheth. And he said, "Am I a dog's head that you belong to Judah? That belongs to Judah?" I don't know. I never heard that term before. Am I a dog's head? But it must have been some kind of, slang in that day. What do I look like to you? A dog's head? What am I, a dog's head? Today I show loyalty to the house of Saul, your father, to his brothers, to his friends, and have not delivered you into the hand of David. And you charge me today with a fault concerning this woman? May God do so to Abner and more also. Check this out, guys. If I do not do for David as the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David over Israel and over Judah from Dan to Beersheba. Now, this is what struck me as I was reading this. Abner knew that David was the rightful king. And he was fighting against Saul against David and David's kingdom and David's position as king, because he had a loyalty to Saul. Even though he was aware this was God's plan, this was God's doing, this was God's idea. And he was willing to fight against God's plan because of his loyalty to Saul. And I think, for all of us, man, what are our loyalties? What is it that you're loyal to that even precedes or supersedes your devotion to Christ and to his kingdom? Is that loyalty your mom or dad or boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife, or something or some sin that you I'm not willing to let go of because that's more important to me than doing what God's asked me to do? Abner was in that place, and he acknowledged it. Look, I'm going to hand over the rightful throne because he's angry now at Ishbosheth because he accused him of sleeping with one of the concubines of Saul. And he's finally saying, you know what, I had enough of this. I'm going to finally do it, what's right. And watch what happens. And he could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. And Abner sent messengers on his behalf to David saying, who is the land? Saying also, make your covenant with me, and indeed my hand shall be with you to bring all of Israel to you. And David said, good, I will make a covenant with you. But one thing I require of you, you shall not see my face unless you first bring Michal, Saul's daughter, when you come to see my face. Now, check it out. What's David still worried about? Another woman? It's like, dude, don't you got enough women? Right? And Michal was his first wife, and when he had to flee from Saul, she was given another husband. And he says, let me tell you, you're not going to come over, Abner, until, Michal, you bring Michal back to me. Now, Michal, we'll see down the road, she's bad news. She's going to laugh at David because he worshiped the Lord, because he danced, because he was seeking after God. So Michal wasn't a catch. But David is still concerned. My first wife, I want you to bring her, and don't even think about coming and talk to me unless you bring Michal with you. And so this whole thing goes down. And look what David says. He sent messenger to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself for 100 foreskins of the Philistines." Now, he goes, "I paid for her. She's mine." I gave 100 foreskins. Now, that's what Saul asked. David actually gave him 200, right? So he goes, "Look, I earned that one. I killed 200 Philistines in order to get Michal to be my wife. So, bring her to me." And so Ishbosheth sent and took her from her husband. Now, that would have been her brother. Ishbosheth would have been, related to Michal. And he went and took her husband from Peltiel, the son of Laish. And her husband went along her to Bahurim, weeping behind her. So Abner said to him, "Go, return." And he returned. Now, I don't know if he was weeping because he was happy or he was weeping because he was sad. When you get to know Michal a little bit, kind of like, maybe he was like, yeah. Verse 16, verse 17, and Abner had communicated with the elders of Israel, saying, "In time past you were seeking for David to be king over you. Now then, do it. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all of their enemies." Now Abner, remember, he had a loyalty to Saul and to Saul's dynasty. He now switches loyalties. And he's telling the people, he goes back and he says, "Look, back in the day, you guys wanted David to rule over you. Now go for it. Now do it." I think that's where Nike got their slogan. Just do it. Just do it. I mean, if that's what you want to do, then, here's your opportunity. Let's put David in the rightful place. Because he's supposed to be the king. My servant David. David in the scripture becomes a type of Christ throughout all of the scripture. Well, one of the things you see that David was a man after God's own heart. The throne of David, the scepter of David was to be transferred to another man, and that man was Jesus. You see, he had to become of the lineage of David. All of it was pointing us that one day there would be a real king that wouldn't have all the flaws, and he would be the king who ruled the nations. And so here, he goes and he exhorts the nation of Israel, go and begin to put David as the king in your life, in your nation, in your country. And I think that there's a great admonishment for all of us, man. That we would put King Jesus, or the one who took David's throne, to be the one who rules our life. Just do it. How many times well, I know that's right, or I know that I want to do, but there's something else holding us back from doing it. Just do it. Just put God in that right place, man. You'll be blown away what God will do in your life. And so he encourages them. Then Abner also spoke, verse 19, the hearing of Benjamin. And Abner went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron all that seemed good to Israel and the whole house of Benjamin. So Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all of Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. And at that moment, the servant of David The servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them, but Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. And when Joab and all the troops that were with him had gone, they told Joab, saying, Abner the son of Ner had came to the king, and he sent him away, and he's gone in peace. And Joab came to the king, and he says, what have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why is it that you sent him away? And he's already gone. Surely you realize that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out and you're coming in, and to know all that you're doing. Now, Joab was David's commander. Abner was Saul's commander. They were, an opposition to one another, fighting for the two different kingdoms for years. But Joab had a real hatred for Abner. He had killed his brother in one of the battles that had happened in the beginning of 2 Samuel. And so when you have just a bitterness towards somebody, just an anger towards somebody, and that's what's going on between these two men. He couldn't let it go. His pride, in that day when someone, killed your brother, it was your responsibility to go and do the same to him. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And, that whole philosophy was there. And it's interesting that Abner goes to King David and he says, what are you doing, King David? I mean, how many times we do that to our king? What do you think you're doing, God? I mean, why would you let that happen? I can't believe, because of some trip that we have, some bitterness that we're holding on to. We can't let it go. And it's interesting that in this whole picture, he is trying to get King David to turn against Abner. Now watch what happens. So you realize that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you, to know you're going out, you're coming in, and to know all that you're doing. And when Joab had gone from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner, who brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David did not know it. And when Abner had returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside in the gate to speak with him privately, and there he stabbed him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Asahel, his brother. Now, Asahel was the one who was killed by Abner. And he was bringing revenge now. I'm going to pay him back for what he had done to my brother. And so he kills him. It says afterwards, verse 28. When David heard it, he said, my kingdom and I are guiltless before the Lord forever for the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. Let it rest on the head of Joab and on all of his father's house, and let there never fail to be in the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or is a leper, or leans on a staff, or falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai his brother killed Abner, because he had killed their brother Asahel at Gibeon in the battle. Now, think about just all of these little battles that are going on within the kingdom. And you look at this whole picture, and it's all of it has to do, of who the authority is and who you're going to surrender to. And how many times the battles that you and I face are because we're not willing to surrender to our king. And we go out and we do something. Joab's going to pay a heavy price for what he had done. At this point, he's been cursed by the king because of his actions. David wanted nothing to do with that kind of kingship. That was how Saul ruled the kingdom. He ruled it by force. He ruled it by just vicious anger. And David had learned the lessons. I don't ever want to be a Saul. I don't ever want to hold on to a kingdom because of my own determination. I want it because God put me there. I want it because God established me. And so David, you're learning David's life. David had a tender heart. David wasn't going to rule with a hand of iron. He was going to wipe out his enemies, but those within the kingdom. And we're going to see, God over and over demonstrate that David was a man that had God's heart. And this is one of those moments. Notice what happens. And David said to Joab and to all the people who are with him, tear your clothes, gird yourself with sackcloth, and mourn for Abner. And the king followed the coffin, and they buried Abner in Hebron. And the king lifted up his voice, and he wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept. And the king sang a lament over Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put into fetters. As a man falls before wicked men, so you fell. And all the people wept over him again. And when all the people came to persuade David to eat food while it was still day, David took an oath saying, God do so to me and more also if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. And all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, since whatever the king did pleased all the people. Now, this is what's interesting. The people are watching David's response, his actions. And the people are going, look, David wasn't the one who planned or plotted Abner to be killed. David has a serious, regret for what had happened, a serious mourning for what's going on. And the people are noticing that David's heart was tender. That David's heart was had been very unlike his predecessor Saul. Remember Saul? He was trying to kill David, every chance he got. Threw spears at him, tried to pin him to the wall, chased him for years on end in the desert, wanting to kill David because he was trying to hold on to his throne. And now the people are seeing a whole different man. A man who's, guided by the Spirit of God. Someone who's willing to, just be in a place of surrender rather than a place of force, right? And it's amazing because, they hadn't seen anything like this yet. Not as a king. Saul was the first king. David's now, the second king, and they're seeing a whole different leader, a whole different leadership. They're seeing a servant, someone who loved the people. And so David is just declaring by his actions in his heart. Look at this. All the people and all of Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's intent to kill Abner, the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zerah, are too harsh for me. The Lord shall repay the evildoer according to his wickedness. And this is something we're going to see in the life of David. We've already been looking at, but David understood the sovereignty of God. That God was going to deal with them. David didn't have to raise his sword against Joab, or he wasn't going to be the one who comes in and revenges now from the other side. He was going to say, God's going to deal with this guy. God's going to deal with the evil that they've done. God's the one who sits on the throne, and all I'm doing is taking the position that God's given me. And guys, what an incredible way to live life, man. You know what? I know God's on the throne. Someone wrongs me, God's going to deal with them. And it's amazing to watch God do so. As you realize that God's able to handle our problems. He's able to fight our battles. He's able to defend us against, the enemy that wants to destroy us. Are you willing to trust him, though? Because either you're going to put it in your own hands or you're going to put it in God's hands. It can't be both. Right? It's one or the other. And David acknowledges, God's going to deal with these guys. And we move. Look at chapter 4. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all of Israel was troubled. Saul's son had two men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Bana. The name of the other was Rechab, the son of Rimmon the Beerothites of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also was part of Benjamin. Because the Beerothites fled to Gideon and had been sojourners there until this day. And Jonathan's son, now we're just going to get a little four kind of story that it'll mean something later, but it tells us Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame at his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came to Jezreel. His nurse took him up and fled, and it happened as she made haste to flee that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. Now, we'll learn about Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth wasn't able to walk because of this accident that had happened when he was 5 years old. And it's interesting because David and Jonathan had a loyalty to one another. And David's going to end up caring for Mephibosheth because, again, David's heart, man. He wasn't threatened by Saul or by Saul's, family, or even though he is the rightful man to the throne, he understood God was in control. Now check this out. This is amazing. Look at verse 5. The sons of Rimmon, the Beeroth, Rechab, and Baanah, set out and came in about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. They came there all the way into the house as though they were getting wheat. They stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah, his brother, escaped. And when they came into the house, he was lying on his bed in the bedroom. They struck him and killed him, beheaded him, and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here's the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, your enemy, who sought your life. For the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants." And David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothites, and said to them, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, 'Look, Saul is dead,' thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag. The one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house on his bed? Therefore I shall not now, therefore shall I not now require his blood in your hand and remove you from the earth?" So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and their feet. I don't get that, but now think about what's happened. These guys were plotting that they were going to kill David's enemy, thinking that they were going to get some reward from David or be moved into some high-ranking position in his new kingdom or in his army. And again, I think it's all a picture for us. Look at the heart of David. He was a man who wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't looking for someone to take care of what God was supposed to take care of. And these Beerothites, the Beer brothers, I call them, kind of helps explain what was up with him, right? These guys, thought, we're going to go down there, we'll kill the king that's over Saul's kingdom, and then we'll chop off his head. I can't, what's he carrying his head all night long? What do you do? Show up, "Hey, David, got something for you." Throw it in front of David, thinking that David's going to be all happy because they had, accomplished that task of killing Ishbosheth. And it's interesting that David says, "You are wicked men. I don't want anything to do with you guys. Matter of fact, you guys are going to die today." And he kills the Beer brothers right there. Just, tells his commander, the young men, to execute them. They cut off their hands, their feet. They hang them by the pool in Hebron. And they took the head of Ishbosheth and they buried it in the tomb of Abner, in Hebron. Again, you got these crazy stories. But all of it, showing us the character of a man. The man David is going, man, I'm not going to look for someone to avenge me from my enemies or those that had it out for me. I'm going to trust the Lord. And as he's now establishing a kingdom that's going to be run very differently. And that's what's amazing about men serving the Lord. When you are born again, the Bible says that you take on a new nature. The old man, you're to be crucified, is to be dead, and then you have a new man that's living inside of you. And this new man, it sees the world from a different lens. It sees the world from a different light. And no longer it's doing what my flesh dictates or what my flesh wants. I'm revenge and anger. But now, God, I want you to lead me. I want you to guide me. I want you to be my sustainer, my protector. You fight my battles for me. It's a whole different world. It's a whole different kingdom that you're under the authority of. And David is demonstrating that, living like Saul, it's a miserable life. Saul would be tormented. David would have to come in with a harp and play the harp because Saul couldn't even sleep at night because he was tormented by the evil spirits, because all he was looking at is his own will and his own wants. And then you have a contrast here with a man who's saying, you know what, I just want God's will. I'm not trying to hold on to a kingdom. I'm not trying to obtain a kingdom. I just want to be what God has called me to be. I just want to follow him. I want to seek after him. I want to know his will. I want to know his purposes. I want my life to reflect his life. And David becomes this incredible picture now. Now, watch this. Look at chapter 5, and we're covering some ground tonight. And all the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron. They spoke, saying, indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also, in time past, when Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king of Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. Guys, did you grab that? Did you see the difference? Saul was holding on to the kingdom, and David was now being asked to be the king. Saul didn't want to let go of the kingdom, and David just, David didn't try to manipulate it. David didn't try to make it happen. He just there and saying, God, whatever you want. The people come and say, we want you to rule over us because you're the one who's really the leader. You're the one who's really the one who's able to bring, safety and security and peace into my life. And so it tells us in verse 4, David was 30 years old when he began to reign. That was when he began to reign in Hebron, and he reigned for 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah for 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all of Israel and all of Judah. And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites and inhabitants of the land. And he spoke to David, saying, you shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you, thinking David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. Now David said on that day, whoever climbs up by the way of the water shaft and defeats the Jebusites, the lame and the blind who are hated by David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Therefore, they say, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. And David dwelt in the stronghold and called the city of David. And David built all around from Milo and inward. And David went on and became great. And the Lord God of hosts was with him. And guys, this is what's amazing. In the last month, they've unearthed the city of David. And they're now pulling out all of this artifacts and all of this evidence that Zion, or the city of David, it's right outside the city gates. Where you go to Jerusalem now, there's the walled city. right outside the walled city. We were able to walk in there this last time we were in Israel, and we were able to walk down into, and they were at that point, they had already knew that was what is called David's city, but now they've unearthed much evidence that that's where David and his kingdom was, and all of his stables, and man, they have all of the layout of what David's palace looked like and what David's city looked like. It's incredible. I mean, all of these years later, these things are still being, the evidence of them still being brought forth. And it's amazing because, David goes in. There was one stronghold when Joshua had come in that they could never defeat, and it was here in Jerusalem. And it was in Jerusalem, and this is what's amazing, it was in Jerusalem that God had said he would establish his king. And what's incredible is that Saul was never able to take that land. But David was. It was the first thing he did when he became king. It was the very mount there on that whole city, there in Jerusalem, and the city of David, in that whole region. It's the very place where Abraham would take up his son and offer him up on an altar. It's where Isaac would become a type of Christ. Abraham, a type of the father, where he was about to offer up his son, and then as he was ready to plunge the knife into his son, the scripture says an angel stopped him and he said, "And now I know that you obey me." And then it says right in the thickets right there was a ram waiting to be offered up in its place. And it was all a picture of Christ being offered up on the altar, on the cross. That he would die for the sins of the whole world, that he would take the place of the sinner. And you're looking at this whole picture, and David goes into Jerusalem and what's known now as the city of David, and he overthrows it. And the first thing he does in his new position as king over the whole land is go into that particular land and overtake it. And then it's amazing because it says that David became great because the Lord God was with him. You see, David's greatness wasn't in David's power and his great might or his military skill. What made David great is that God was with him. And then it tells us in verse 12, check this out. Verse 11, the Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel. No, it wasn't about David. This was about God. And God wanted his kingdom to be established, and David knew God's the one who did all of this. God's the one who established all of it. It had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with God. All that God was looking for was a man that was willing to yield. And that's true, guys, today. God doesn't need any of us. None of our abilities or our talents or our gifts. God doesn't need us. You see, God desires to use us. And if he can find a vessel that's yielded to him, that's saying, God, I don't want the glory. I'm not interested in the position. I just want to be a vessel that you can use for your glory. And when God finds that man, he begins to pour his spirit into him, and he begins to use him for his kingdom. And that's all that David was. He wasn't anybody special. David has faults. David had some chinks in his armor that are going to be exposed. He was a man just like you and I. But he was a man who was willing to yield. A man who was willing to acknowledge that you know what, God, I can't do any of it without you. I have nothing to offer. Before David's fall, he'd never been that great. Once he sinned, his household was in turmoil. His son rapes his own sister, incest. There was At that point, David has to flee because one of his boys, Absalom, tries to overthrow his kingdom. I mean, at that point, David would never be the same. And here's the deal. We can look at that and go, well, David sinned and God still blessed him. No, David paid the consequence for that sin dearly. Don't ever think that I can sin and God's never there's not going to be a consequence for it. That's a lie. Ask David. That's a lie. You're weakened when you give in. The kingdom was weakened when David gave in. But here's a man who acknowledged that this isn't something I can do. It's got to be something God does. No, notice this. And David took more concubines and wives from Jerusalem after he had come from Hebron, and more sons and daughters were born to David. And these are the names of those who were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemumu, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishu, Niphig, Japhia, Elishama, Elidah, and Eliphat. I mean, think about some of these names. I couldn't even imagine having to sing happy birthday to these guys. When the Philistines heard that he had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David, and David heard of it, and he went down to the stronghold. And the Philistines went and deployed themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said to David, go up, and I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand. And I love it. Well, what's David's learning? I mean, think about it. He ran to the Philistine camp, hiding from Saul. And David never sought God, do I run to the Philistines? Never, not once. But now David's learning these lessons, and it's just process that God takes us through where, you got to learn the lessons. And David's learning the lesson. You know what? I'm not going to another battle. I'm not making another decision without asking God's wisdom. And now he says, Lord, do you want me to go up against the Philistines? And God says, go for it. I'll give them your hands. And David goes up and he wipes out the Philistines. Check this out. And David went to Perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, the Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breakthrough of water. Therefore he called the name of that place Perazim. And they left their images there, and David and his men carried them away. And the Philistines went up once again and deployed themselves at the valley of Rephaim. Check this out. That battle's won. God had told him, go into the battle, I'll fight that battle. And now they regather and they're going to fight against David again. And I love it. Look at verse 23. Therefore, David inquired of the Lord and said, shall I now go up, circle around behind them, and come upon them in the front of the mulberry tree? Now, he inquired of the Lord again. He didn't just assume, well, God gave the Philistines into my hands last time, I can go fight the Philistines this time. No, it was God, what do I do now? What do I do now? I got this new situation, this new circumstance. God, do I go and fight this battle now? And it was David learning his reliance upon the Lord. God, what a lesson for us to learn, to be reliant upon the Lord. Every battle you face, if you would go and ask God for his wisdom, for his direction, rather than trying to fight that battle in our own power, our own strength, what a different outcome we would have. What a different life we would live if we would just be willing to say, God, I got this decision right here. God, what do I do here? God, if this isn't you, close the door. If it's you, open the door. Let me walk through it with boldness and faith. But God, I want your wisdom. I want your counsel. I want your direction. And when God finds men like this, man, he begins to use them in mighty ways. And I encourage you, be that kind of man, be that kind of woman. One that's seeking God's counsel in all of your battles and all of your decisions. And David becomes a man who accomplishes great things. The kingdom under his power will have peace because he was willing to go and fight the battles that needed to be fought. We'll finish the chapter. We're already there. Look at verse 24. And it shall be when you hear the sound of the marching, the tops of the mulberry tree, then you shall advance quickly, for then the Lord will go out before you to strike the camp of the Philistines. And David did so as the Lord commanded him, and he drove back the Philistines from Gibeah as far as Gezer. As the Lord commanded him. And it was just simply a man now who's willing to yield. A man who's willing to say, God, what do you want? And that you and I would be those kind of men, those kind of women that just, God, what do you want? That you would lead me, you would guide me, that you would be the one who rules over my life.